Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a very, very special event. It's a conference of the pilot program for Caribbean Resilience, PPCR, and we thank those who are the primary partners, the Climate Investment Funds, the International Development, Inter-American, I'm sorry, Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, and of course, the University of the West Indies. And yes, this is very, very critical, this particular kind of event, because we're all from small island developing states. Well, not all islands. We've got Guyana, we've got Belize, we've got mainland countries as well, but we're all coastal, and climate change is real. We're in vulnerable economies, there are extreme temperature events, vulnerable populations living on marginalized land, and our economies, for the most part, are fragile, dependent on one particular industry, and very often that's tourism, which would have taken a beating from the current pandemic, and of course, also because of the increasing change in weather and ultimately climate, the extremes in temperature. If you are understanding me, but just a little bit because your primary language is French, then yes, we have that covered, especially for our friends in Haiti. And just go ahead and select translation because there is, in fact, translation available for you. Want to know where that is? Well, just look for the globe along that bar at the bottom of the screen where you have share screen and all the other options, right? And there's a globe visible there and translation is right there. So just select that and you'll be able to have your heart language tell you exactly what's happening in the sessions. Of course, the converse is true. When we have French speakers, if you need English, then of course that is also an option. Just like to thank everybody for joining us, all of the partners in this particular event, because without partnerships, we just can't do it. This is huge. And the fact is that it takes all of us who are affected in one way, shape, or the other to be a part of the solution. We're affected adversely, potentially, but we can always fix it together. And so we thank every single person here in the room with us. It's a two-day virtual event, and we'll have a conversation, a rolling conversation about a wide range of topics on small island developing countries in the region up to date. And of course, we'll showcase some of the solutions that have been undertaken because that's important. We need examples of success, and that will make us sure that it's not hopeless. We'll make sure that we can learn from each other's successes across the 2 days. It's a very rich program, and for some parts of the day, there'll be parallel sessions, and you'll be advised exactly how to get into your sessions. In fact, if you've got your program up, there are links. There are links right where the sessions are indicated, and that particular link next to the topic will put you into the required virtual room for your topic of choice. So all in all, we're having everything together. Please make sure that you reach out to anyone who's part of the conference. If there's any kind of question, discomfort, hopefully not, but we'd like to ensure that you're all set, all good to go, and that we will have a very rich combination of things today, of activities, of discussions, of exposés, of solutions, all of this. So the donor for this particular event, the donors, the Climate Investment Funds, the Inter-American Development Bank. It's being executed by the University of the West Indies, and it's managed, the project management is from the Mona Office for Research and Innovation. It's been funded to the extent of 10.3 million US dollars. And it started in June 2015 and runs to the end of this calendar year, December 2021. We also have other partners, of course, the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, CIMH, the Climate Studies Group at MONA, the CSGM, and the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPA, and the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism, because of course that's a crucial part of what we do. The sea provides us with a range of resources, including food. The Caribbean Agricultural Research Development Institute, CARDI. The beneficiary countries, the Commonwealth of Dominica, Grenada, Haiti, Jamaica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. So we've got a nice Caribbean family sharing in this program, which has been unfolding since 2015 and is moving towards its crescendo. So, of course, today's event will be very, very special for everybody involved and as a demonstration effect too to the rest of our Caribbean neighbors. Why are we doing this? Well, the PPCR is intended to support the mainstreaming of climate risk resilience in the development policies and strategies of all our countries. And it does that in several ways, which we'll delve into with the various presentations, but of course, as a demonstration effect, of course, to strengthen capacities, of course, to scale up and to leverage all the investment that's been coming in from various sources, because you want to make sure that there's no waste, no overlapping unnecessarily, and that one feeds into the other. We don't have a rich history of that in the past, and thank God we're getting a grip of that. And the collaboration across donor funding has been commendable. So it should have more bang for the buck, and of course to strengthen our capacity ultimately. The idea is to have richer Caribbean nations that are much more resilient, more prosperous, and that the true potential of our peoples will be unleashed because our resources are fully exploited without undermining our environments. So good to see you. ECU, some we're seeing directly, some not, but we know you're there because we see you registered, and it's very good to be with family and in company of folks of like mind and similar collective purpose. We're getting into our official opening in just a little bit, and we do have a number of special speakers, and they'll come up for that particular segment before we even get into the various presentations of each day. We're going to be hearing today from Professor Dale Weber, the principal of UWI Mona. We'll hear from Professor Terence Forrester of UWI Sedeco. Yes, we're also hearing from the very august Professor Michael Taylor. He will give our keynote address, and that's going to be titled Setting the Context. Good way to start any kind of discussion so we know what we're working with, everybody, and we can have the similar point of reference. Yes. And how do we respond to climate change in the Caribbean? So setting the context and responding to climate change in the Caribbean. So yeah, that's coming up, and it's really, really good to see so many participants who are, like I said, of one mind, one purpose. But the diversity, the strength is in the diversity because we're not all from the same place. We're from a range of islands and mainland territories, and together we are going to be making a big difference. I'll pause just for a little bit, and then we'll jump right into our opening exercises in just a little bit. I just want to kind of spot a number of very special individuals I'm seeing. Therese Turner Jones, always such an amazing pleasure to see you. A solid Caribbean woman who has served the globe and served the IDB at various levels. Therese, good to see you. So very good to see you as well. And let me see, let me spot. Um, yes, we've got our very, very special guest from the the Climate Investment Funds, uh, Mafalda. Wave at us, please. Yes, good to see you. Good to see you. Welcome. I'm just scanning and looking, of course. Uh, Prof. Weber, are you on yet? Because we go a very, very long way back. We share, we shared a little, we share a mid-island town, Mandeville, and a number of other stops. I've had the pleasure of serving within the Institute for Sustainable Development. So very, very special connection there with Prof. Weber, who is now principal of the Mona campus of the UWI network of, of colleges and university. Yep. All right. Oh yes, right. We won't see Prof. Weber here today, but we will hear from him. That's important. That's important. Yeah, I keep on joking about the fact that Jerry is short for geriatric, but yeah, you know, Prof. Weber, we will hear from him, and that's the important thing. We will hear from Prof. Weber. He's taking the time to create something very special for us, and we will benefit from his words, his, what direction he's taking, and all of that. I did neglect at the very beginning, I'm sorry, to introduce myself. I'm Jerry McDaniel. I'm a broadcaster in Jamaica, and I've also worked across the Caribbean on various development issues. Have had an incumbency at the World Bank, and this is my kind of environment because I like to see, I'm sure you do too, collective effort to ensure that we're looking at our differences, comparing notes, and going towards solutions that are sustainable. And so I'm very, very happy to be here as part of this very, very important conversation. Uh, I'll be popping in and out just to make sure that that everybody is duly welcomed and that we move as smoothly as we can in this very, very rich exchange here today online. Isn't it odd how a couple of years ago, this is not necessarily what we would be doing? We'd be very, very happy to hop on a plane and get to Barbados, get to the Bahamas. Never been to the Bahamas, Therese. You need to help me change that. and just coming around and the fet at the end of the serious discussions and all that. We can still fet. We just fet in spirit, connected by our oneness, but physically distanced. Wah, wah, wah. Yeah, we can do that too. We're learning to get the best out of this new virtual climate, the virtual situation. And I think we're going to be able to take away a lot of very good things from this. Like moving from one meeting room to the next. It's just a couple of clicks, right? You don't have to where's conference room so and so, and you're scurrying down the corridor to make sure you don't miss the start of the presentation. Nope. As long as the broadband holds up, it's a click, click, and we're there. And it's efficient. And I think organizations are going to not have to spend a huge sum on refreshment anymore. How's that? You can reallocate the budget to more solutions. What else are we learning? We're learning outside sorts of good stuff, aren't we? And in spite of the very, very sad veil the veil of sadness is probably a better way of saying it, of losing our loved ones and losing some productivity and our fragile economies taking a battering. All of that is real. I think perhaps in these times we are probably better suited than most. We're accustomed to battling with crises, so maybe Caribbean people are a little bit more able to emerge from a rough spot like this because we have crisis after crisis, battle after battle. So it's probably bringing out inner strength in the Caribbean woman, the Caribbean man, this craziness. And I'm confident that we will emerge victorious. Right. Uh, and anybody here from República Dominicana? I can't speak Spanish. I'm just showing off. From the Dominican Republic. Now that's a very special part of the Caribbean region. And I can't think of any Caribbean conference or discussion without the DR. And so and our friends from Haiti. Remember, I said it, I'll say it again because people join at different times. If you're understanding, but it's a little tough, especially when we get into technical issues with the experts, you will want to hear it in your mother tongue, your home, your heart language. And if that is French, please just go to the navigational bar. It's for most of us at the bottom, some it might be at the top, but you know where all the options are to start video, to chat, share screen, all that stuff. Just look for a globe. Look for a globe, and you'll see below that interpretation. And yes, we're offering that in English and in French because most of us primarily English speaking, and of course our beloved Haiti very much a part, front and center in this conversation. And we want to make sure that the comprehension is on target and that everybody is fully inclusive in every way. And so that is again something that we're very happy to be able to facilitate in this wonderful conference, uh, dealing with a critical issue, an issue that's particularly critical to our region. We're looking to start in just a little bit. Let's just ensure that we're good to go. Um, Once again, we are going to be hearing from Professor Dale Weber, from Therese Turner Jones, from Juan Pablo Bonilla, and from Mafalda Duarte of the investment funds. I think we're all good to go. And well, let us hear now from the principal of the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies, Professor Dale Weber. He's ensured that he's recorded something very special for us that we can hear and absorb just now.
Dr. Juan Pablo Bonilla, IDB Manager, Climate Change and Sustainable Development Sector. Ms. Therese Turner Jones, General Manager of the Country Department Caribbean Group. Ms. Mafalda Duarte, CEO of the Climate Investment Funds. Professor Michael Taylor, Dean, Faculty of Science and Technology at UWI Mona. Mr. Jared Allen, Climate Change Senior Specialist with the Climate Change and Sustainable Development Division of the Inter-American Development Bank. Representatives of the Caribbean regional bodies, the CIMH, the CSGM, CARFA, CARDI, 5Cs, the pilot program for climate resilience focal points around the Caribbean, project management unit of the regional PPCR here at the University of the West Indies. Colleagues, members of the media, good morning. I am pleased to bring greetings in my capacity as Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of the West Indies Mona campus as we move through the Caribbean Regional Climate Conference 2021. We owe a debt of gratitude to all the partners who have collaborated in the execution and management of the Caribbean Regional Track of the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, the Caribbean Regional PPCR, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Project Steering Committee, the CIMH, 5Cs, MORI, and all the partners who have made this possible. I must use this opportunity to commend the team at MORI, the Mona Office for Research and Innovation, especially the leadership of Dr. Georgiana Gordon-Strong, and Mr. Ainsley Henry, and now Ms. Erica Houghton, for the coordination of this project. Climate change is still the most critical global threat for our region and many small island developing states. We are acutely aware of the importance of climate change and the need for adaptation strategies. This project has made significant contributions that have helped to bolster our resilience in the region and have impacted global climate change scenarios in general. As a university, we're grounded in regional realities here at the UWI. We are proud of the contributions that we have been able to make towards this end. We have been at the forefront of climate adaptation and mitigation strategies for the last few decades and we have made incredible strides as a university and as a campus. Our involvement in this project has enabled us to lengthen those strides through the multinational, multi-sectorial collaborations. We have been able to leverage our teaching, our research, our outreach, which are the mantra of the UWI, and the capacity for us to reach more people and stimulate more significant environmental protection impacts than we would of our own by having these relationships. Caribbean people understand the effects of climate change, but they may not always know how everyday actions can lead to environmental degradation and worsen the impact of climate change. Therefore, the success of any climate resilience initiative depends on heavily engaging and educating as many people as possible to stimulate and sustain change. Additionally, successful interventions focus on skill and capacity building to support change after the projects have ended. This project successfully achieved both of these ends by boosting existing climate resilience initiatives and launching new initiatives, all in a linked and systematic way that took into consideration the needs of people in communities and how these are related to national and regional frameworks, especially in climate adaptation focus. The Caribbean regional track for the PPCR is coming to a close, but we anticipate that the strides we have made under this project will be solidified and even accelerated in short time. The data gathering and sharing that was enhanced under this project will significantly bolster the region's ability to plan to offset the vulnerabilities and recover in extreme weather events. Additionally, the accessibility of these data will be critical in helping the region respond appropriately and promptly in the case of impending disasters. It is particularly heartening to know that the smartphone applications developed through the project will enable stakeholders, from fishers to planning officers, to have access to these data as well as contribute new data as they gather it. The linkages that were solidified or established over the last few years between stakeholders across national borders and bodies, as well as institutions, bodes well for the future. Greater coordination between stakeholders will translate into quicker, greater, more responsiveness to climate change phenomena, as fewer resources will need to be dedicated to the mobilization across these entities. Climate change is the tremendous intergenerational challenge of our time, and everyone has to step up to the plate if we are to have a chance of overcoming this challenge. The project has given us a fighting chance by increasing knowledge and building capacity at the level of communities, organizations, and governments. I hope that this conference will give us all the space and time to access the successes of the past years and plan on how we will consolidate them in the years to come. I wish for you a wonderful conference and look forward to all the speakers and what they have to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Weber. Very succinct. And we appreciate the job you're doing here in Jamaica on behalf of the entire region, of course. And yes, the executing agency is very much vested. Very, very much vested is the IDB. The IDB providing the resources, but in a very hands-on way. They help with the monitoring. They're there. They're very much into hand-holding. It's not just, there are the funds, do the best you can. And a particularly concerned, well-integrated member of the Societies of the Caribbean is the General Manager, the Country Department for the Caribbean of the IDB, Mrs. Therese Turner-Jones. Therese, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jerry. And as you were giving your introductions at 8:45, I was reflecting on the fact that you used the word family several times. And that's how I feel this morning. Not only have been working on this for a long time with UWI, but also just thinking about the wider Caribbean and all the persons attending today's event, the participants. This is a great family event. But let me first say, I'm really pleased to be here with Professor Weber, of course, with the CIF CEO, Mafalda Duarte, and my colleague, Juan Pablo Bonilla. and of course, all of the other representatives who are here today. It's exciting because we're going to hear not just the results, but we're going to share some experiences of all of the partnerships. Professor Weber mentioned all of the partners who are involved in this with us. It's not just the IDB and UE, but it's all the others he mentioned, 5Cs, CARDI, many others. So it's really great to be here. I just have a couple of things I'd like to say for emphasis. Today, June 1st, of course, is the start of the hurricane season in the Caribbean. And we're all very seized on that, particularly as we're living through a global pandemic. We know from the UN Refugee Agency that climate change, whether it's manifested in prolonged droughts or heavy rainfall, or desertification or coastal erosion, environmental degradation, sea level rise, as well as cyclones in some parts of the world, more than 20 people have to uproot themselves every single year as a result of this. Jamaica and the wider Caribbean, of course, we're all too familiar with this phenomenon of hurricanes, especially. And I want to throw myself back to 2018 with Hurricane Dorian. Jerry, you mentioned that I'm a Bahamian, you've never been to the Bahamas, and that's really a very shortcoming in your development, and we have to fix that. But I want to say that I was actually traveling to Connecticut at the time when I got the call, and I was interviewed by radio in Jamaica, asking my reactions to the Category 5 hurricane that hit the Bahamas. And I must say, I did not imagine to have such an emotional feeling at the time, because I wasn't there, but just the sense of dread and doom and devastation and seeing the photographs, seeing the videos of homes being destroyed and people being displaced was devastating. And I felt helpless because I wasn't there. But at the same time, why should the Bahamas be spared? It's the first hurricane to hit us with such devastation in not that long a period, because we've had impacts of Matthew just a few years prior. But I must say, we didn't expect that level of devastation. So I want to remind all the participants today that this is an ever-present threat and danger that this region lives through every single year. Obviously, through our partnerships, what we're trying to do is not just raise awareness, but also build capacity around how to adapt to climate change and how to deal very specifically with disaster mitigation. And these kinds of programs, which focus on, and you're going to hear, for example, from a lot of the projects, and I'm really happy that the video is going to be shown about the blue carbon Clarendon mangrove restoration, because Professor Forrester, myself, and the UK High Commissioner actually walked that area. And if you've never seen what a devastated mangrove area looks like, I couldn't believe I was in Jamaica. It's a part of Jamaica, Clarendon, which is not very far from Kingston and St. Andrew area. But to me, it looked like parts of Africa that I had visited. So it was really bizarre to see that and to walk that coastal area, which had been, completely eroded because of previous storms and so on. But to actually see that the mangrove restoration for that coastal area can be done in a way that will not only restore the mangroves and provide coastal protection for Jamaica, for at least that part of Jamaica, but also that it would involve improving the livelihood of the community which surrounds this area. So I'm very pleased with that and very much looking forward to seeing that video. What I want to say finally is that given that we're also approaching World Environment Day on June 5th, that we should really use this conference an opportunity to sensitize every single person who has access to either the conference, but also in our wider communities, about how important our environment is. You heard already from Professor Weber why we're doing this work, why the partnerships are important. Obviously, the CIF with their concessional financing that we can leverage with the IDB's work that we're doing in the region goes a long way in providing more resources for the region to be able to do projects that are going to be impactful to help in this area. So I want to again congratulate the University of the West Indies, Professor Weber, all of the teams that he mentioned, and of course the IDB team. And this particular regional project is headed by Gerard Elang. He's been at it for 5 years. We really owe him a huge debt of gratitude, because this has been difficult to get going. And I think now that we're seeing some results, and we're going to hear from those over the next couple of days, I think you will all agree that this is work that is not just critical, but work that is important and work that will go a long way to helping us build a more sustainable environment in the Caribbean, but also help us deal with future natural disasters and impacts from climate change. So thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. And I look forward to hearing and seeing the results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Therese. Always very relatable and very much to the point. Brilliant. Thank you so much. And we're staying with the IDB, but we're getting more granular. We're getting into the gentleman who is very hands-on. He is the manager of the climate change and sustainable development sector at the IDB. We can't get better than that. Let's welcome Juan Pablo Bonilla.
Thank you, Jerry, and good morning to you and to everybody who is connected to this important event. And I would like to congratulate Professor Weber from the university. It's been a pleasure working with you, and Therese and Mafalda. As I always told to Therese, I think one of the most important challenges that we have is how to create capacity in the field. And she always remember us the importance of having executing units in the field, in the Caribbean. So Teresa, I think this is a very good example, as you mentioned. This hasn't been easy. I think we have learned a lot through the PPCR. I wanted to say thank you to Gerard Aleng as well for the work that he has led with the Caribbean team, with the university, and with different sectors. For me, this is a very important date, not only because we're getting close to June 5th, but also because I was remembering, Therese, a lot of conversations that we've had about how to not only sensitize, but create awareness about adaptation. It's simpler to say we need to do renewable energy, we need to do electromobility, we need to do decarbonization. It's harder to think about adaptation and developing resiliency. And we had an event with Mafalda a couple of days ago with the CIF about transformational and change and systemic change. And that day, I was saying that a couple of years ago, we started thinking how to finance adaptation to climate projects. I think we have made a big evolution on how to include adaptation as a component of development projects. And I think that's one of the key issues that we're gonna see throughout these days about lessons learned. Understanding that there is no adaptation projects or programs. We need to include and develop a resiliency as part of a better development. And this should be part of the new Caribbean after COVID and learning from the Caribbean. This should be part of the future of any coastal city in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm from South America. I grew up in Cartagena, in Colombia. I always said that in the coastal cities in Colombia, Cartagena, Barranquilla, Santa Marta, coastal cities of Brazil and other countries of the region of Central America, we need to start learning also from the Caribbean and exchange experiences on what we're doing related to resilience. With Theresa and the president of the bank, we had recently a meeting with the mayor of New Orleans, exchanging different views about what they learned from Katrina, about the importance of community-based solutions and nature-based solutions as part of green recovery, and also about the importance of technology. The example of the cell phone that it was just mentioned at the opening is a very good example, but at the same time, understanding what green infrastructure means. We talk about sustainable infra the whole day. Sustainable infra also means nature-based solutions. So that's why I love the example that Therese is putting every day about Clarendon and about blue carbon, about the importance of mangroves. I know we're going to start hopefully piloting soon a cash transfer program related to mangrove conservation and restoration. That is something that we've learned also from COVID, the importance of linking social issues with green recovery and environment. I think part of the recovery, and that's part of what the bank is putting on the Vision 2025 as a transversal pillar, climate and sustainability, is how to link green recovery, not only with environment and social issues, but also with youth, with having a purpose for what youth are going to be doing in the next years, to have employment, but also to have a better society. So I think we're going to listen these days, many lessons learned. And as Therese said, it's going to be fascinating to see not only the results, but what we have learned to escalate adaptation and resiliency as part of a better planning for not only the Caribbean countries, but for Latin America and the Caribbean. So thank you very much. And it's a pleasure being with all of you today.
Muchas gracias, Juan Pablo. Yes, I'm trying out my Spanish, but we'll get there. And we'll also get to Colombia very soon. I promise. I need to. Good, great tales of what is happening there in your country that we can also follow. You're so close and have remained so far. We got to change that. Thank you very much. And you heard the nitty-gritty, what's actually happening and the management of this whole process. Another very highly valued partner. When I heard of the existence of this particular organization, I said, hallelujah, hallelujah, 4 words, right? It was really good. It was really good. And at this time, we welcome Mafalda Duarte. She's the CEO of the Climate Investment Funds. Very, very eager to hear from you, Mafalda.
Gerard, thank you very much. And thank you. You're doing such a great job. Thank you. And it's good morning and warm greetings to everyone, distinguished guests and participants and my fellow colleagues. Juan Pablo, I think these days we see each other more often than we did for several years because of all of this virtuality and the possibility of participating together in more events. And Therese, pleasure being with you as well, and with Professor Weber. Also like to, well, I hope, first of all, I hope that every one of you and your families are keeping healthy and safe during this very challenging times. Also like to thank the Inter-American Development Bank and the Caribbean PPCR team for taking this initiative and organizing this conference and inviting us to speak and be part of it. At this point in time where the regional Caribbean program is coming to an end and much has to be learned from it and the broader PPCR work in the region. So it's a real pleasure and honor to be here. We have been spending, the last year battling this COVID-19 pandemic, but we have to bear in mind that climate change has not taken a break. On the contrary, if we look at the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, they recently announced that 2020 was the second hottest year on record on the planet. And it came just a mere 0.02 centigrade behind 2016, the hottest year on record. Also, according to the World Meteorological Organization's Hurricane Committee, the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season had a record-breaking 13 named tropical storms, including 13 hurricanes and 6 major hurricanes with direct impacts in many countries, in the Atlantic Basin, the Caribbean Sea, and the Gulf of Mexico. So as the WMO Secretary General, Professor Tal has also pointed out, this record number of hurricanes combined with the COVID-19 is really creating the perfect storm. So the Caribbean, as you all know, you are from the region, most of you, you are in the region. This is a region that, because of being geographically remote and spatially dispersed, low-lying and economically undiversified, with small domestic markets and the high dependence on food and energy imports, the countries in the region are highly exposed to these external events and shocks such as COVID-19. And you are also on the front line of climate change. So countries in the Caribbean were still recovering from the devastating hurricanes when COVID-19 hit in early 2020. And this really had a significant impact on the tourism industry that the region is so dependent on as an economic lifeline and key driver of development. So in St. Lucia, for example, tourism revenues make up of 98% of total exports. And according to the data from the UN World Tourism Organization, the Caribbean destinations experienced a 67% fall in international tourist arrivals in 2020 when we compare to 2019. And after living through this pandemic for over a year now, we've also recognized that some disparate similarities between COVID-style health crisis and climate change. There are some similarities that one should bear in mind. I think they both test and stress the region's already stretched technical and fiscal capacities to respond to the crisis, and they also expose the many social and economic vulnerabilities with the region. These crises, they disproportionately affect the most vulnerable populations within our societies. So as we cautiously emerge from the pandemic and start recovering from this deep health, social, and economic impacts of COVID, the devastating impacts of climate change are still there. And unless we really tackle this, this health, economy, climate triple crisis simultaneously, the recovery efforts won't yield the meaningful or lasting results that we so much need. We are very much aware and fully recognizing the need for building climate resilience in the Caribbean. The climate investment funds, which I have very much the pleasure and the privilege of managing, and working with our partners, including the multilateral development banks, the Inter-American Development Bank, the national governments, non-governmental organizations and businesses. We supported over a dozen projects under the pilot program for climate resilience in the region. And really being true to our mandate of a learning laboratory for large-scale climate finance, we really supported a wide range of climate resilience solutions with different financing modalities and different partners. We supported the mainstreaming of climate and disaster risk management into national and sectoral development planning, strengthening of infrastructure, data technology and technical capacity to improve hydromet and climate services, the piloting of climate resilient solutions in agriculture, urban development, water resource management, and the transportation sectors. We also tested innovative financing models to engage private sector in building climate resilience. So over a decade on right now, these efforts have delivered some very encouraging results and have also provided very valuable lessons for designing, financing, and implementing climate resilience investments at scale. And in collaboration with the other teams within the climate investment funds, we have been documenting these early results, good practices, and key learning. Some of these include hydromet and climate services, infrastructure, and the relevance of local stakeholder engagement. The activities that have been implemented in the Caribbean have been featured prominently in these learning initiatives, and very grateful for the opportunity that this conference provides to help share some of the learning we have captured so far. We must learn from each other, and we must learn from the experience, and the Caribbean has a lot to bring to the table there. Moving forward, so indeed, through our experience, the Caribbean region has amassed a formidable knowledge and capacity in managing and responding to the climate-related shocks. And throughout the pandemic, the region has also been successfully managing to control the outbreak. So moving forward, as I was saying, with the deep financial impact caused by COVID-19, the region has a very steep hill to climb in the fight against climate change. But we can't stop the fight, or we can't go back to the old way. This is not an option. We know hedge fund managers and investors have warned that the global impact, economic impacts from climate change by 2100 is estimated to be close to $600 trillion if global greenhouse gas reduction commitments are met, and over 800 trillion if they aren't. So these are staggering numbers. And if anything, the pandemic has taught us the importance of really building the resilience of our economy, our communities, and our environment. So we must really remain resolute and continue our journey towards the grand Caribbean vision of becoming the first climate resilient region in the world. And that's really impressive. So to achieve this, we need to work together. The pandemic has also underlined the power of collaboration and coordination among communities, among governments, businesses, multilateral institutions, and the scientific community. And as a climate financier and a learning laboratory, the Climate Investment Funds, we are really ready to play our part, working with our partners, including the governments in the region. And through our ongoing and new strategic programs, we really plan to step up our support for low carbon and climate resilient investments. We will focus on addressing the financial barriers to scaling climate action, including through innovative financial instruments. And on the learning front, through our Transformational Change Learning Partnership, we have now established the Resilience and Landscapes Interest Group to further engage and exchange lessons with the adaptation practitioners on transformative actions to build resilience in sectors and in communities. So we invite you all to actively be part of this group as well. Of course, we are under no illusion that this is not going to be a walk in the park, but with your, and Jared, you alluded to this as well, with the fighting spirits of the men and women in the region, the wisdom and really the leadership that the region has shown through the many crisis situations, I think there's every reason for optimism and hope. I myself, try to retain always strong optimism and hope. So really my words are, let's grasp this post-COVID-19 recovery as a once in a generation opportunity to really reflect, to learn, and more importantly, to work together for a green, resilient, and inclusive Caribbean. Thank you very much again, and I wish you a very productive, insightful conference.
Thank you very much, Mafalda. That really, you know what? I found myself taking notes because it was so pointed. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to say, we heard all the things that made us buzz: the research, the innovation, the results, the lessons, the documentation of said lessons. We have a poor record of documenting stuff and we lose information. So that is always a buzz for me. And I think for every other Caribbean person online, right? Maybe some nations get it a little better than others. In Jamaica, we very often don't get it that right. And so at the bottom line, of course, was using a bad thing for good. The crisis, the optimism, we cannot afford to waste a good crisis. I don't know who said that. I should give the attribution, but it's not me. But I subscribe to it. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Mafalda. It's time now for us to see something very special. It's a piece that will communicate in and of itself, but it needs a little bit of context for you. It's a video, but I won't preempt it. What I will do is to introduce the gentleman who will come to you now and tell you exactly what this is about before the preview. Pleasure to welcome Professor Terence Forrester from the UWI Solutions for Developing Countries, UWI SUDECO, at the University of the West Indies Mona campus in Jamaica. Professor Forrester is director of UE SUDECO. He's a physiologist and academic physician whose research focus is broadly direct biological contributions to human resilience. More recently, Professor Forrester has been addressing translation research to enhance human resilience through environmental interventions. His current area of work is restoration and preservation of mangrove forests along the Jamaican coast, which has embedded within the interventions to enhance positive and mitigate or remove negative drivers of human resilience. In that small but very potent package, we have why we cannot do without Professor Forrester's presence here today. Prof, it's over to you.
Thank you very, very much. Good morning. Let me begin by thanking the IDB and all our hosts for this opportunity to unveil our first communication piece using the arts to frame an ecologic problem that we're addressing, but simultaneously the promise of some solutions to that ecologic problem. If a map is available, it will show a bird's eye view of our project area in Clarendon. Can't share screen, which stretches from Salt River in the east, around Portland Ridge to Milk River in the west. Along this stretch of coast, there are some 3,500 hectares of mangroves, of which 1,600 have died off. The IDB funds and supports our restoration project, which has as its foundation cornerstones the use of best science and community engagement in co-creating and implementing solutions, as well as monitoring to inform preservation actions as we go forward. One of many key services to be restored is, of course, carbon sequestration, a key climate change mitigant. The upcoming video now is our first use of the arts to frame first and then convey key messages about the project. It recognizes that our stakeholders are highly varied and varied across many domains. But simultaneously, the video embraces the arts as both a cognitive and an emotional tool that's capable and used to communicating messages with some fidelity across gender, age, education, culture, language, etc. Important, the idea for the video arose out of a conversation with Mr. Gerard Alleng, IDB Washington, who some months ago shared a YouTube video, moving YouTube video, of a classical ballet approach to communicating drought-driven ecological collapse in a South African watershed area. We took that concept and we worked in Jamaica with the Edna School for the Arts, the National Dance Theatre Company of Jamaica, and the Ashe Production Company to co-create a piece. It, of course, speaks in the Jamaican vernacular for both music and movement, which helpfully is recognized globally from Bob Marley onwards. But I should and now I shall allow the piece to speak for itself. So thank you for the opportunity of unveiling it here, and I'll hand over to the persons to show the video. Thank you.
My goodness. No, this is why they say when we got to STEM, because STEM is a crucial bit, we have to make sure we got the science, technology, engineering, and the math. But they said, how about STEAM? The arts. I like how Prof said it. It frames it, it frames it, it pulls us in. We are it, and it is us together collectively. We're in that space, and we don't need to do jargon because the body speaks. And we're Caribbean people. You can tell a Caribbean person if you're in the middle of winter in an airport in Germany, freezing to death, and a Caribbean person walk past, or just catch on a bench. The body language alone say, that one come from yard. We're not sure if it's Barbados. We're not sure if it's Belize, if it's Haiti, wherever. But that body language pulls us in. Brilliant all around. And now it's time for us to get to our main presentation. As they say in the movies, and now for the feature presentation. And we have to introduce this gentleman very well. He's going to be doing the keynote address titled Setting the Context, Responding to Climate Change in the Caribbean. That's a biggie. Professor Michael Taylor joined the UWI in 1999 as a lecturer in the Department of Physics. In 2008, he was promoted to senior lecturer, appointed head of the Department of Physics in 2009, and elevated to the rank of professor in 2013. In 2014, he was appointed deputy dean for the Faculty of Science and Technology. Professor Taylor is also the director of the Climate Studies Group at MONA, the CSGM, position he has held since 2007. He has since then successfully positioned the CSGM as a center of regional thought and expertise with respect to climate change science as the lead center for coordinating regional climate modeling efforts. Prof. Taylor is an alumnus of the UWI Mona campus. He received his BSc degree in general and environmental physics with first class honors, no less, pursued his MPhil at the UWI, and then PhD, his terminal, from the University of Maryland. Professor Taylor's research has focused on determining the scientific imprint of climate change in and at the scale of the Caribbean islands. His work has resulted in over 100 publications, including 16 books, 16 book chapters, 50 journal papers, has garnered over 4,000 citations to date and brought international recognition for regional science. That bit is a must because we must be seen as a center of thought globally. The resources, the mental resources exist. And thanks to people like Prof. Taylor, we are continuing to raise our hands and say, yes, we are here. Friends, it's a pleasure to welcome the Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology of the University of the West Indies at Mona and the chair of the Climate Studies Group at UWI, Professor Michael Taylor. Prof.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping that you are in fact hearing me. And I just want to begin by saying, boy, I really appreciate the invitation to give this keynote address. I want to thank very much all the organizers, including, of course, the IDB, who have provided the funding for the entire PPCR project, the PPCR project teams, all the collaborators across the PPCR region. Thank everybody who has joined in to this opening ceremony of this conference, two-day conference. Let me also start by giving an apology. My simple apology is, how can one be asked to follow such an inspiring and beautiful video? I think it is really a challenging and difficult task. But with those apologies, let me try to do what has been asked of me, which is to set a little bit of a context. We have heard a lot, and certainly based on what we have heard, I don't think there's anything new that I will bring to the table in this setting of this context. But I do want to set a context. I want us to have a quick conversation about climate change and the Caribbean. And I want to do it at the title, Taking Account of Climate. What do I mean? Well, one of the things you'll have to admit that you have heard so far is that climate change represents this grave threat to the survival and viability of small island states. And we have known this for quite a while. And so if the Caribbean is to survive and if the Caribbean is to remain viable, then certainly the Caribbean has to take account of climate change. What do I mean when I talk about taking account of climate change? Well, that's what I want to talk about in this very, very quick context setting. I want to talk about what I call the 2-3-1 of climate change. Hope you'll forgive me. Very simple, really only saying what has been said before. But let's have a little conversation about what I'm calling the 2-3-1 of climate change. What do I mean? I mean this. When we are beginning to take account of climate change in the Caribbean, I think what we have to do is note that there are 2 things that we need to note, 3 things that we need to consider, and then 1 thing to do. So in talking about this 2-3-1 of climate change, in an effort to say, let's take account of climate change, there are 2 things we have to note, 3 things we have to consider, and 1 thing to do. In this talk, very quickly, very simply, I want to tell you, what are these 2 things that we need to note? What are these 3 things that we need to consider? And then what is that 1 thing that we need to do? So let me start quickly with the 2 things we need to note. The first thing I think we have to note as we begin to take account of our climate change is this. Simply this, a new and unfamiliar climate regime is emerging in the Caribbean. So you heard that I'm a scientist, and so I draw on the science to try to make this point. When I look on the science of climate change that has emerged, say, over the last 2 decades, and the Caribbean has come a long way in putting its own science on the table, it tells us a couple of things, but nothing that you don't know intuitively. It tells us, of course, that the Caribbean is becoming a much hotter place. And yes, we have seen in the Caribbean the 1 degree increase in Caribbean temperatures in the last century, much like what the globe has seen. But it also tells us that irrespective of where you look in the Caribbean, where you go right across the Caribbean, that 1 degree increase in temperatures is translated in 2 ways. 1, very hot days, and you can see in the graph on the right that the number of days that are really, really, really hot has just steadily increased. But it has also translated into very, very hot nights. I keep saying this when I speak. You know, in the Caribbean, we are kind of used to hot days. But what we're really not so used to is hot nights, because we can deal with hot days by going to our various respective places if we have it. But in the night, we expect that it's going to cool down, and that after a certain point in the night, we will get cooler temperatures. But lo and behold, the science is telling us that in the last 50 or 60 years, we see 23 more hot days and nights than we used to see in 1950. Or put another way, summer seems to be starting earlier, reaching its peak and then lasting longer. So the science is telling us that, yes, it's not a figment of your imagination, the Caribbean is hotter. But the science is also telling us that that's not the only change we are seeing. It's telling us, yes, it's hotter, but our rainfall has become way more variable. And so if I pull on the science, you will see that for total rainfall, if I look on that right diagram again, it seems flat, but what immediately stands out for you is that 1 year it is very wet, the next year it is very dry. And we get these swings in rainfall. And so we get this intense variability to our rainfall pattern. And that's one of the things the science is telling us about how our climate is changing. But it's not only the swings in the total rainfall, but we see that the nature of how rain falls is changing. We're beginning to see patterns emerging. Certainly things like, we get several days where it is dry, and then when it rains, it really rains. So the science is telling us that part of what we are seeing is it's getting hotter, the rain is more variable. It's also telling us that we are seeing higher sea levels, and that right across the Caribbean, irrespective of where you are, the sea levels are rising. And all of us can identify this by pointing to that one place in our country where we can say, I remember when that place used to be on the land. So you're pointing in the sea. And we have been seeing sea level rise in the long term of about 1.7 millimeters per year. And I'll come back to that. Or post 1993, almost double that. So we have been seeing higher sea levels. And then, of course, we have been seeing more extremes. You heard about it in the talks earlier. So we know that we have had, at least 2 major region-wide droughts in the last 11 years. And I pull on the work of Herrera and Alt here in the Caribbean. region-wide, multi-year. But we also know that we have seen more intense storms in the region. And we can all think of those Category 5 hurricanes over the last 3 years. Put it all together, the first thing we have to note when we are beginning to take account of climate change in the Caribbean is a simple thing. The Caribbean climate is not behaving as it used to. We must know that a new, unfamiliar climate regime is emerging in the Caribbean. And the science is telling us that. One of the things about this new unfamiliar climate regime is that it's not one or the other. We are living this new multi-hazard environment. So we can get the hot with the extremes, along with the variability and the sea level rise. If that is the first thing to note when we begin to take account of climate in the Caribbean, then the second thing to note is that the science tells us that it's not only that an unfamiliar regime has already emerged, but a new unprecedented climate regime is coming. So that's some of the climate science that I do. So we try to take climate models and we take all the scenarios of the future, and we don't know what the future will be. So we have to take multiple different storylines of the future. And we say, if we take those storylines and put them in the model, what will the Caribbean look like in the future? Well, here are some of the pictures that emerge if we do nothing as a world about climate change. For the Caribbean, even hotter times are ahead. And so you can see the top diagram is the worst case scenario. The bottom one is a kind of a better case scenario. But irrespective of scenario you take, even hotter times are ahead. How hot? Maybe 3 to 4 degrees by century's end. Up to maybe 98% of days being hot, by where hot is defined by current standards, only 2% being cool by the 2080s. That's what some of the science is saying. Okay, hotter, what about the rainfall? We never lose the variability that we're talking about. So we'll always have the 1 year being really wet, 1 year being really dry. But we now begin to vary about a reduced mean. So we have the variability, but maybe up to 40% drier. And this will be characterized by other things like shorter rainy seasons, longer, more severe droughts. And so this is the kind of future that we're beginning to look into. What about those sea levels? Well, even higher sea levels. And again, right across the Caribbean. I suggested millimeters per year of sea level rise already. Maybe things like up to a meter of sea level rise by century's end. And then what about those extremes? Well, the projections are, of course, for more intense hurricanes. And what you're looking at is, for example, the category 4 and 5 hurricane tracks in the present and in the future in a warmer climate. And the idea is not more hurricanes, but more intense hurricanes, storms with higher rainfall rates and stronger winds. And of course, the science also gives us some idea of the droughts. And so if we look at the percentage of time we'll be under either moderate, extreme, or severe drought, you can see that as we go into the future, greater percentage of our time, according to the science, will be spent under one of these drought conditions. What am I trying to say? Again, put it together. I'm trying to say that the second thing we have to note is that where we are going is that we're coming to a possible climate regime as we have not seen before. So we're entering a climate regime that is marked by what we call the unprecedented. Because I've already made the case that already we've seen 1 degree, but to come if we do nothing is up to 4 degrees. Variable rainfall, but variable with 40% dry. More extremes, but more intense extremes. We talk 3.5 millimeters per year and up to 1 meter sea level rise. The idea is that the future Caribbean will look a lot different. And the kind of future climate we will have is a climate regime we have not lived through before. So as we begin to take account of climate, I am arguing you cannot take account of climate without noting these two things. There are two things to note. A new unfamiliar climate regime is already emerging. So we are living in the unfamiliar now. But you have to also take account of the fact, or take note of the fact, that an unprecedented climate era will come. And so the challenge for the Caribbean becomes living with the unfamiliar now while preparing for the unprecedented to come. You cannot take account of climate in the Caribbean without taking note of these two things. Okay, quickly, but I'm arguing, as we begin to take account of climate, there are two things to note, three things to consider. If these are the two things to note, that we are already living in an era, a climate regime now that is unfamiliar, and that there's an unprecedented climate era that is likely to emerge if as a globe we do nothing about climate, then it almost throws up three things the Caribbean cannot but consider. What are these three things? First thing, our sensitivity is being exposed. We must consider that in the unfamiliar climate of the present, our sensitivity is being exposed. What on earth do I mean? I think you heard a picture being painted earlier of what the Caribbean is like. If you were, and I think it was something like this, if you were to try to create a Caribbean profile, it would look something like this. In many cases, either flat or low-lying or narrow coastal with mountainous backbones. And the point we're making is that in the Caribbean, the picture is we have limits about where living can occur. We're either living on a steep mountainside or we're living on a shallow or narrow coastal plain. But you also heard that we were small. So our land area is much smaller than our exclusive economic zone or our ocean area. And so a large percentage of the populations live within a few kilometers of the coast. You also heard, of course, that we were isolated and exposed. We're in the tropics, clearly affected by the things of the tropics, and we have to deal with that, and we are dispersed as you heard. You heard that we're natural resource dependent. We have an intimate relationship with things like the oceans, rain-fed water systems, rain-fed agriculture, and of course, with the emerging use of RE resources, it makes us further natural resource dependent. And you would have heard, of course, that we live a tropical life. The truth is a Caribbean life is a daily life structure to take advantage of ambient conditions. We live an outdoor life. And the things that we depend on, therefore, depend on this outdoor life. So you think about tourism and you think about agriculture, etc., where we get our water. If that's the Caribbean profile, then in truth, the Caribbean profile is one of an extremely climate sensitive region. And what do I mean by that? Strong, intimate, and direct linkages between climate, existence, economies, standards of living, and way of life. You cannot separate climate from any of these, from our economies, what defines our standard of living, water, health, etc., and what defines our way of life. If we are to that kind of climate sensitivity, extreme climate sensitivity, therefore plays out in all aspects of Caribbean life. So it plays out in health and in agriculture, forestry, water, finance, wildlife, coastal areas. The climate sensitivity we have is embedded in our daily life and it's pervasive across all areas of our life. Here is what I'm trying to say. In the era of unfamiliar climate, that sensitivity is not only now becoming more obvious, but it's also being played upon to become more disruptive. And all I had to do was pull on some newspaper headlines across the region. The headlines now are not just about the flood, but notice that it's about how the flood affects health, or how it has damaged agriculture, or how the beach is succumbing, or how the water supply is failing, or the coral reefs, or the tourism, my favorite one, where the handcarts had to rescue the ship passengers in tourism. And you begin to see that that sensitivity, which was veiled in some parts, is now becoming obvious, and in an unfamiliar era is becoming disruptive. We must consider that in this unfamiliar era, that our sensitivity is becoming exposed. But quickly, it's not only that we have to consider that our sensitivity is becoming exposed, but we also have to, second thing we have to consider is that our vulnerability is being expanded. What do I mean? In this unfamiliar climate era, as more and more unfamiliarities emerge, and certainly as we go into the unprecedented, existing climate vulnerable groupings are expanding So people who we knew who were vulnerable to climate are expanding, and new vulnerable groupings are emerging. I use this picture from my own country, and this represents a community, lovely beachfront community that was built. The people who built it, and at the time they built it, they were amongst the climate vulnerable in that they were close to the sea. They have now had to move out, and you can begin to see that more and more people are becoming climate vulnerable on the coastlines. Think about the fishing communities and that rely on the beaches and the lack of those, erosion of those beaches. And you can see what I mean by climate vulnerable groupings are expanding. But then think also of the future. And we thank the IDB for their wonderful tool. And what they have done is allow you to map, what if we had 4 degrees, as I suggested, in the future? What would happen to some of our Caribbean islands? You can recognize Barbados. And if you are from Barbados, you recognize the pieces that seem to be inundated and are missing. But you could also do it for Tobago using the tool. And you can also do it for Barbuda using the tool. And you begin to see that people who lived in certain places who were not previously vulnerable are becoming vulnerable. So our vulnerabilities are expanding. I want to push the point a little bit further. This is what we call suitability maps for ginger produced by SEAT. And the point being made here is that they use simply climate and said, well, if we just take climate conditions, where is it most suitable to plant ginger in Jamaica? And you can see the suitable areas are the green, and you can see that the suitable areas narrow and narrow. And so the ginger farmer who was in the green area that was close to the coast suddenly loses his possibility of having a ginger crop. But more importantly, the interior of Jamaica is our biodiverse rich area. And so suddenly the biodiverse rich area becomes vulnerable because of the threat of it becoming the area more suitable to do some of the agriculture. Or another way simply to put it is this. The Caribbean advocated for 1.5 degrees in the future as the global target. But the Caribbean climate science that says that even if we achieve 1.5 degrees, it's not a safe climate for the Caribbean. 40% less hydropower in Suriname, diminished agricultural productivity in Jamaica, regional cost damages 2 to 3 times higher, drought conditions, and the inundation of coastal infrastructure. You can begin to see that the more the climate changes and will change, our vulnerability is simply expanding. Let me end that point by just simply saying, and what we have to consider is that new climate vulnerable groupings will emerge. So the poor, the elderly, the children, people who are health challenged, outdoor workers who cannot survive the kind of consecutive hot days, our biodiversity, our heritage sites that were never built for the kind of climate, intense climate, the future generation, a new population of climate vulnerable will emerge. If we are to take account of climate, then we have to consider, secondly, that our vulnerability is being expanded. And then thirdly, quickly, as I quickly move to the end of this, if we are to take account of climate, the third consideration is this, that our viability is being endangered. I think that's where I started with that quote. But we already see this, and we already see it, that we are having a diminishing capacity to cope. We heralded 2017 as simply unprecedented when we had 3 Category 5 hurricanes passing through the Caribbean. We all remember the Irma, Maria, Jose. We said, boy, this is unprecedented, and we're going to take years to recover from this. But then in 2019, we had Dorian, and then we heralded Dorian as unprecedented in how it traversed the Caribbean. And then I think you heard earlier from Ms. Duarte about 2020 being unprecedented because of the number of hurricanes that we had. So every year we suddenly have an unprecedented event, 2017, 2019, 2020, and this is just looking at one climate phenomenon. Well, the problem with unprecedented climate is, of course, unprecedented impacts. And so when you look across the region, the result of having unprecedented climate already, glimpses of this kind of unprecedented climate already, is the unprecedented impacts it has. This is a famous World Bank diagram, and I simply pull on it, which tells us very clearly the diminishing capacity that we have to cope, always having to deal with a climate event. The Caribbean emerges, the Caribbean is in red, as the region above all, even above other small island states and other states, that has the most damage already, that has the greatest disaster frequency, and that is certainly comparable with the other small island states of an affected population. We have this diminished capacity to cope, not simply because of the intensity of the event, but because of the recurrent nature of climate extremes. But this diminished capacity to cope will not end now. But as we move more and more and transition from unfamiliar to unprecedented, we can see that the cost of climate as we go into the future keeps increasing and increasing and increasing. And certainly by the time we hit the end of century, if we keep doing what we are doing and don't change pathways, a larger percentage of our GDP will be simply spent trying to cope. So, simple point that I'm trying to make. As we take account of climate, there are 2 things we have to note and 3 things to consider. We have to note that a new unfamiliar climate regime is emerging now. And we have to note that an unprecedented climate era is coming. If we note these 2 things, then we have to consider these 3 things. That already our sensitivity is being exposed, that already and to come, our vulnerability will be expanding with new climate vulnerable people emerging, and that our viability is already being endangered and is simply at risk in the future. Lastly, if these are the 2 things to note, if these are the 3 things to consider as we take account of climate, then what is the one thing that we must do? I think you know it already. The one thing we have to do is act. A couple of things about this action, and I'll quickly end. The action has to be at all levels. It has to be global, it has to be regional, it has to be national, it has to be community, and it has to be individual. Clearly, the likelihood of action increases as you go towards the center, which puts a huge challenge on me and you, that we cannot simply excuse ourselves and say the responsibility is somebody else, when in fact, it is more likely that we can do something. But the action has to be at all levels, and the Caribbean has to situate itself within all levels. What kind of things am I talking about when I talk about action? Well, we could spend the whole day talking about this. Well, let me just say that the action has to have a couple of characteristics. One, it has to be a strong mitigation agenda. So mitigation has to be a key part of the action. The truth is the Caribbean put 1.5 degrees on the table as a global target. And the IPCC produced a wonderful report that looked on this. And if 1.5 is to be achieved, then global carbon emissions have to fall by, say, about 45% by 2030. And we have to come down to that net zero mark by mid-century, which means that we really have to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere. The Caribbean, having put 1.5 degrees on the table, in my opinion, cannot excuse itself from the actions and the reduction in greenhouse gases, nor should they want to. For us, that strong mitigation agenda will center around a couple of themes, and these are win-win themes for us. Certainly, they will center around preserving our sinks. We have natural sinks for that carbon dioxide. That's our oceans and that's our forests. And so that's why that mangrove replanting project goes way beyond just the coastal defense that it represents or the livelihoods it represents, but it is also the mitigation, our contribution to mitigation. But it also has to deal with our sources. So what we use for energy, our transportation, and our waste, And so mitigation has to be a part of that action, where we simply reduce the greenhouse gases. because in truth, the areas where we can mitigate are win-win areas for the Caribbean region. But what else? We have to have an unavoidable adaptation agenda. The truth is, if we even achieve 1.5 degrees, and we must hold firm to holding the entire globe to 1.5 degrees, as I have already shown you, 1.5 is in and of itself still not a safe global target for the Caribbean region. And so we will have to adapt. And we want to make sure that the adaptation, and some of it you will hear about in the conference over the next 2 days, those are some of the successes of the PPCR. But let us make sure that our adaptation has certain characteristics. It must be comprehensive. It can't be in one sector and not in another. It must be contextual. Our adaptation must be driven by our needs and how we define our problems. It must not be adaptation foisted on us. It must be targeted, and that's where research comes in. The adaptation has to be consistent. It has to be consistent with the mitigation goals that we are setting for ourselves with our national determined contributions. And it also has to be compatible with our SDG goals, because not all climate actions will represent synergies with the SDGs. So we have to make sure that there are synergistic for adaptation and recognize the trade-offs. And of course, our adaptation agenda must exploit the opportunities. I think I heard that a little earlier, that climate does come with opportunities to do things differently. And so it must exploit these through the creation of environments for innovation, technology, and certainly entrepreneurship. Very, very quickly. What else must the action have? It must be a sustained education agenda. Education is important for engendering behavioral change, but we must make sure that the education agenda is sustained. It must not be here today and gone tomorrow. And of course, the video that we watched earlier was a beautiful example of using the multimodal opportunities for education. And lastly, that action must be deliberately collaborative. So it must encapsulate a deliberately collaborative agenda. The Caribbean, the challenge that climate change is posing for the Caribbean dwarfs any single Caribbean country. We simply do not have the resources individually to deal with climate. However, we have proved over and over again, and I think that it's emerging even more so with this PPCR. So I use the PPCR project, that's a collective approach where you make partners out of everybody, government, private sector, academia, civil society, youth, etc. is the only way that we're going to achieve the resilience. That's the beauty of this PPCR project. So I end, in that context setting, I'm saying, listen, as a Caribbean region, we cannot help but take account of climate. How do we take account of climate? Well, we do this by noting two things, considering three things, and doing one thing. We have to know that a new unfamiliar climate regime is approaching. We have to know that an unprecedented climate era is to come. We have to consider that our sensitivity is being exposed, our vulnerabilities are being expanding, and our viability is being endangered. And then we have to do one thing, we have to act. Strong mitigation, unavoidable adaptation, sustained education, and deliberate collaboration. And so this is the last word that I say. If you forget everything I talked about, the 2-3-1 of climate, 2 things to know, 3 things to consider, and 1 thing to do. Remember that this conference is about visioning a pathway to a climate resilient future. You know what that pathway is marked by? Recognizing climate, reckoning with climate, and responding to climate. That's our pathway. Thank you very much.
My goodness, what hit us? A category 12 academic brilliance, my goodness. I think that perhaps this gentleman, Professor Taylor, you just epitomized something that we've always been told on our side as communicators. You communicate well, and you've done the work and you understand it, because even the least educated in a formal setting, just with experience and attention, you can understand it. I don't think I went back to school a while ago and I loved it because it is us, isn't it? It's what we're doing, it's who we are. It's in depth, it's clear, it's pointed. I think we need to lift that thing and break it down into different sound bites and send it all over the Caribbean so that people can just get it just like that. A conversation. We're good at having conversations. And why am I gushing like this? It's because it's true. It's true. You can't hold back. You can't hold back when you get that kind of clarity. And so the alarm bells are there, the possibilities are there. Thank you so much, Prof. I think you've got us all wired now and very, very willing to go. This is where we're going to wrap our opening plenary, but we must say thanks to all concerned. We must thank let's flip it to us and thank those who are participating right here online now. It's 220 something. It goes up and down, but it's a large number representative. I want to single out anybody from the NGO community. We've got a number of friends from the public sector. Of course, the private sector always a voice because business continuity, the economy is all of that. Of course, we're talking about the academics and those who execute. That will be represented here primarily by the University of the West Indies, Mona, the principal, some of his key executive members, like our professors that spoke just now. And of course, those who provide the financial resources, but not just that. Our finance partners also give counsel. And sometimes the context is even more crucial than just the funds. And we're talking about the IDB, and of course, led by Therese for the Caribbean, and the Climate Investment Funds, led by Mafalda, and all the other speakers here this morning. We really want to thank each and every one of you for really whetting our appetites and getting us to think through. I hope we've got everybody, well, every country represented. You can do a quick hand raise if you're from Dominica, if you're from Grenada, if you're from Haiti, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and of course Jamaica, just to make sure that we have a full circle of our family here to deal with what we've got to deal with today and tomorrow. And of course, I have to also just go right back to Professor Taylor again and remind us that this is the framework for today. It was so clearly laid out. If you're like me, then you'll have your notes, and everything that we do today, we'll check it against it and check it against our personal experiences, check it against what we think we know, what we've learned, and then we can come up with a very, very rich brew that we can all sip from together. You like that imagery? And so I hope you're as excited as many of us are. I certainly am very, very pumped now to have this discussion, to listen and to contribute where there is some value to be added. So a big thank you to every single human in this virtual room, everybody who lives, works, and proceeds to make a life within the Caribbean, those who live outside of the Caribbean but support us in our venture to really take our places in the sun, literally and figuratively. Just before we go to our first set of sessions, just to remind you that translation services are available. Just look for the option. It's a globe and it has interpretation under it. French is available, English is available, our translators are online. So whatever language the presenters choose of those two, then you can hear it in your heart language, your preferred language of the two. Also, the next sessions, I've seen our friends responsible for this meeting dropping in the chat, and that's great. That's reminding you what the sessions coming up are and the link. So you don't have to scramble, go in there, pick the session you want, click on that, and Bob's your uncle, as the Brits say. You're in the room that you need to be for the rest of the discussions. So from me for now, it's just to have a really, really good time in the deeper sessions well, and look out for them in the chat, or you can look at your program. The link is there, and you'll know just by eyeballing it that you're going to be heading into the correct room. Thank you so much, friends. Thank you all. And have an absolutely wonderful and productive time in what's left with our conversation this Tuesday, the 1st of June. And you have heard, of course, that we already have a storm out there before the official start of the hurricane season. This is real. This is real. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back in due course.